Wine. It is fascinating. Of course, if you have a broken bottle and a torn piece of cloth, then you might have yourself a mystery. I'm the Bible sleuth, and I am on such a case. It all began in Mark 2:18 in the KJV. The disciples of John and of the Pharisees used to fast, and they come and say unto him, Why do the disciples of John and of the Pharisees fast, but thy disciples fast not? And Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. No man also seweth a piece of new cloth on an old garment, else the new piece that filled it up taketh away from the old, and the rent is made worse. And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, else the new wine doth burst the bottles, and the wine is spilled, and the bottles will be marred. But new wine must be put into new bottles. I was stumped, thinking something didn't quite add up. A wedding, torn cloth, and spilled wine. I needed to get to the bottom of this. The question is, where do I start? I know there's something fishy about this Levi guy, and it was at his house where it all took place. Maybe I should look into him. Jesus did approach him about becoming a disciple, and Levi threw a party for Jesus. In fact, it was here that the people began to accuse Jesus about eating with tax collectors and sinners, Levi being one of those. I think I will start my researches there. Well, I was right. Come to find out, Levi may have been an alias. I knew there was something about him. In Mark and Luke, the tax collector was Levi, but in Matthew, the tax collector was named Matthew. So was it Levi, or is it Matthew? And what is the explanation? I did find that in Mark 3:18, Matthew is listed as one of the 12 apostles, and Levi is not. So did Levi go by two names, or is there another tax collector? It wasn't uncommon for a rabbi to change a disciple's name. Jesus changed several, in fact. Maybe Levi or Matthew was one. There is no record of the name change, however. Levi and Matthew, they're both described in similar settings and both collected taxes. I also found out that whoever Levi was, he was probably unpopular and unfortunately well known in the city of Capernaum. Jewish people believed that tax collectors sold out the Roman Empire. It didn't help that collectors became nefariously rich, which may explain the name change. I'm also thinking Levi may have thrown the party, accepting Jesus' invitation into the disciples. Wait a minute. That sounds familiar. There was another tax collector that did something similar. Zacchaeus. Anyway, let's get back to Levi or Matthew. Levi was probably fed up with the religious leaders and their rules. I'd bet, in fact, his little get-together was held on a rabbinical fast, though not necessarily intentional. I know this is speculation, but it would have provided a background for the question that spawned the parables. What do I mean here? These religious folks, they used to mandate certain days of the week to fast for various reasons. Jesus confronted them harshly for their fasting practices. I don't think he rebuked these guys, who it turned out, according to Matthew 9:14, they were the disciples of John. It isn't clear of their tone, or if they overheard the previous statements about eating with sinners. But his response to them was still unique. He didn't rebuke them, which might indicate the question was an honest inquiry. I have another question. Why did Jesus allude to the marriage illustration with the bridegroom? And then he jumped into parables about torn cloth and burst wine bottles. Was Jesus prophesying about his ascension when he associated himself as the bridegroom? Absolutely. But was there also a message to John's disciples designed to confirm that he was truly the Messiah? I think so. It is quite possible that the absence of John indicated that his ministry was coming to an end. Strangely, Jesus diverts randomly from a wedding theme into totally unrelated parables. But are they unrelated? No man also seweth a piece of new cloth on an old garment, and no man putteth new wine into old bottles. Have you ever tried to patch a torn pair of jeans? Those repairs don't usually last. I found out that new wine, or what a vintner calls must, creates carbon dioxide gas as the yeast ferments, and it has to be released to prevent the container from bursting. And that is why modern wine containers have relief valves. It still doesn't answer the question, though. What does it mean? It's easy enough to see that Jesus was referring to the old and the new covenants, but could he have also been prophesying about something that was coming up in the next 50-ish years in the newly formed church? You see, Jewish followers would try to impose Jewish tradition on Gentile believers, specifically with circumcision. It's a bit like mandated fasting, a tradition rather than true heart-changing fast, patching old beliefs on new freedom. The Jewish believers would struggle with it. However, it isn't the new cloth with the tear, rather the old. As for wine, I uncovered that the original word used for wine bottles can also mean wine skins. Basically, that is a whole goat skin carefully removed from a sacrificed animal and turned inside out, tanned, and treated with some sort of conditioner. The openings were tied shut to hold wine for aging. As the wine fermented, the pliable conditioned skins would stretch, allowing the expanding gas to absorb back into the wine. The word used for new, as it related to bottles or wineskins, could also mean recondition. Wineskins had to either be conditioned or reconditioned if they were used to store new wine. So could Jesus have been prophesying that Jewish people would not accept reconditioning of the new covenant? Absolutely, but that would be true of other people too. Luke 5:38 through 39 says, "But new wine must be put into new bottles, and both are preserved. No man also having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith, the old is better." That has been true even to this day. The Jewish people have continued with old wine, having lived their lives forbidden to read various portions of the Torah that clearly prophesy concerning the Messiah. Those prophecies, over 300, were all met with Jesus. He fit every one. Let's get back to the wedding and see what Jesus said, though. The image he painted referred to his disciples as children of the bride chamber. What did he possibly mean? What possible importance is cloth and wine in Jewish weddings? This requires further investigation. Well, I came across a possible hypothesis. What if the cloth that Jesus referred to was a chuppah? It's a ceremonial arbor with a cloth tied to 4 poles. In ancient times, the same cloth would have a dual purpose as a prayer shawl or talit. A talit is a garment that Jewish men wear over their heads when praying. They're a family heirloom. It would have been important to prepare such a legacy if a gust of wind had grabbed it and caused a tear during a previous wedding. The tradition of a bride and a groom standing under a chuppah dates back to biblical times till now. In fact, a chuppah was probably at the wedding in Cana where Jesus turned water into wine. The chuppah represents the home of a bride and groom and honors the patriarch Abraham and his wife Sarah, who kept their tents open as a sign of hospitality. Pharaoh and King of Abimelech of Gerar were lied to about Sarah being Abraham's sister. Egypt even experienced judgment on the land because of her and because of this lie. They became aware of Abraham's deception when they witnessed him caressing Sarah. Guess why? Because the tent was open. What's interesting is Jesus was familiar with Abraham's hospitality because he experienced it as the pre-incarnate Christ. Jesus said unto them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." This is one of the reasons that this theory is so powerful. It is spanning thousands of years with this response. One further point to argue this theory is Jesus called his disciples children of the bridegroom, or what could also be interpreted as friends. The connection? Abraham was called a friend of God. Remember that he confided in Abraham about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and allowed Abraham to negotiate that destruction. Think about this. Jesus in his pre-incarnate form was a friend of Abraham and now calls his disciples friends, and that includes those who believe today. So what about wine? Wine in a Jewish wedding ceremony consists of 2 cups, one for the bride and one for the groom. These cups represent a blessing over each of them and is similar to a Sabbath. That is, the sad part of this wine tradition is that it was because of the lack of faith of the Jewish people to believe in God's provision during the Sabbath year, as well as relentless abandonment of God that led Israel to be taken over, exiled, and eventually dispersed among the nations. Their temple was destroyed, and so was Jerusalem. In stark contrast to all of this, God considered a divorce for their hardened, adulterous hearts. I uncovered that in Jeremiah chapter 3. So what is the verdict about these parables? Reconditioning of the heart is a process that will yield a delicious wine within the life of those who accept Jesus. But it is a process. We want things immediately, but this is not his way. Wine takes time. We can't simply attempt to patch our torn lives with this portion of faith or that, but have to be willing to accept his new cloth that he is passing down to us. It is a personal covenant with Jesus, Yeshua the Messiah. Also, look what Jesus said. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. Fasting would, and it still should, be taking place after Jesus' ascension. As Christ's followers, we need to be fasting and praying and wait as we wait his return. The hour is almost upon us. We must be standing under our new chuppah, spiritually, with our lamps trimmed and lit, eagerly awaiting his arrival, because it will be then that the prophecy will be fulfilled in Matthew. But I say unto you, I shall not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. This is the ultimate blessing cup of wine from God the Father at the marriage supper of the Lamb.